I'm your host, Patricia Simpson, Director of Political and Career Programs here at the Leadership Institute. We're joined this evening by Matthew Hurt, who is a direct mail copywriter. He is a campaign operative and a full-time activist, I would say, in the spare time that he really doesn't have. Matt is here to talk to us about crafting your message. So Matt, what do you have for us tonight?
Absolutely. Tonight we're going to be talking about developing and delivering your message. This is one of the most important aspects of campaigning. If you're a candidate or you've got a ballot initiative or you're trying to advance your philosophy or your cause, the most important thing, or one of the most important things, is developing a concise and coherent and marketable message. So we'll be talking about that for the next hour. If you have any questions, feel free. You can email us at live@leadershipinstitute.org or tweet at me if you want. I think the Twitter is at the bottom of the screen, and I can take these after the show. Love helping conservative activists. So for the next hour, we'll be live, and then feel free to ping me after the presentation if you'd like, if you have additional questions. So we'll jump right in. Obviously, you are not normal. You're sitting here at your computer watching a webinar about how to develop a political message and sell that to your neighbors and friends and voters. You're a little bit outside the mainstream. So we're proud of you for joining us tonight, and we're proud of you if you're watching this in the rebroadcast in any way. But we're here to advance a conservative philosophy, and we thank you for being here. The single most important question is, why should they care? Why should potential voters, why should your neighbors, why should your fellow churchgoers, your fellow PTA members, the folks in your neighborhood, why should they care about your message, your candidate, and your cause? And so hopefully in the course of this webinar, we'll talk about that and sort of figure out why or what you are going to do to craft a message that will ensure that those individuals care about what you're trying to sell them. The common problem is we're all very forgetful. If you look at this chart here, memory retention over the course of this has 16 days, reduces significantly. So if I see a message or I see a commercial on television or I read a candidate's literature, I'm going to slowly forget about those specific points, what that candidate stood for, what that cause was trying to advance. And so it's very important for us to craft something that is coherent, that is concise, and that's easy to remember. So what exactly is your message? You're essentially selling a product. You're a salesman for your candidate or for your political party. Do you have a good product? Is your candidate polished? Is your ballot initiative easy to understand? Is it something that you can rally folks behind? And can you sell that product? Can you develop a message? Can you advance the cause in such a way that you bring people onto your side? You know, the game of politics is always about addition. You're always trying to make your tent bigger. So the more people you can sell your message to, the better chance you have of winning on Election Day. So our product is the candidate or the ballot initiative or the political party, whatever it happens to be. What is the image that you want to portray? Obviously, if you're conservative, you use terms like hardworking, like patriotic, like limited government, liberty. You may stray into words like Tea Party and other things like that. You want to be able to use terms that are familiar with people or that people are familiar with and really connect with those individuals. So the candidate is not a laundry list. Your candidate is not good on taxes, pro-life, pro-Second Amendment, pro-free market. It's really a picture of an individual, of a human being. You're selling someone who is a tangible person with a family or with interests and a passion to advance the limited government causes. And it's okay to be on the offensive. In fact, that's my favorite place in politics to be. If you're on the offense and you're defining yourself, you're not having to defend attacks from your opponent or the other side. And be what you are, not what you're not. If you're honest in politics, you never have to remember what you said. Because you were honest, you don't have to remember the lies. So just be true to yourself. If you're working with a candidate, ensure that candidate is always honest. Don't tell lies, and just be as honest as you can. So your message is 4 things. Message equals EC cubed. Emotion, contrast, connection, and credibility. And over the next few slides, we'll talk about these one at a time, so I won't spend much time on this slide. We'll get right into it. What is the emotion? How do you want the audience to feel? In 2008, candidate Barack Obama made an emotional connection with millions of voters. New voters, young voters, minority voters, a diverse coalition of folks who had an emotional connection to what he was saying. They in some way were invested in this in a way that isn't just my candidate will vote for lower taxes, my candidate will vote for the Second Amendment. He made a connection, and that's strong in politics. If you can meet someone, if your candidate can meet an individual or meet a group of people and connect with them on an emotional level, you'll have much better success than if you're not able to. In fact, candidate Mitt Romney was seen as being sort of an emotionless, robotic candidate. And that's one thing that there was a disconnect with voters. They couldn't connect with him. Additionally, you'll want to draw a contrast. How are you different from your opponent? What is the other side saying, or what would they do if they're elected? Will my opponent raise taxes? Will my opponent vote for measures that restrict gun rights? Or will my opponent vote for measures that are pro-abortion or not pro-life? So you should be able to draw a contrast. And you should make that connection. Why is it important to that individual voter, that teacher, that lawyer, that doctor, that student? Why is it important to elect Matt Hurt or Patty Simpson for dog catcher? It's very important that you are able to make that connection at a very personal level. And finally, the credibility. Why should your audience believe you? If you're not a credible candidate or belong to a credible organization or a credible group, they're going to tune you out. And it's very hard, once you've been tuned out by voters or by individuals, to get back into their frame of reference and into their system. Here's a perfect example of a disconnect in the message. The Washington Post, top of the fold, the picture is President Bush, George W. Bush signed a law to ban a type of late-term abortions, and he's on stage with, there's Rick Santorum, there's Orrin Hatch, there's, I think that's Denny Hassert, and then a few others, basically a bunch of guys, a bunch of old guys. And what we've seen in recent months, when President Obama has a presentation, he has a press conference, or he signs a new law, or he talks about an issue, who does he bring out? He brings out children, he brings out women, he brings out diverse groups. The difference in 2008 is very stark as well. When John McCain took the stage at an event, who did he have behind him? Other people who look like John McCain. Who did Barack Obama have behind him? Young people. African Americans, Hispanic Americans, women, other people who were very diverse in a way that people looked at him and said, oh, that's a candidate I can relate to. So this is a terrible image for Republicans, and it's the Washington Post, so it's what they were looking for. So the Leesburg grid is a way to develop your message and to draw a contrast. So what we're going to talk about for the next few minutes is identifying strengths and weaknesses, both for you and for your opponent. So in the top left corner of the box, you've got us on us. This is how we're going to define ourselves. For the next few minutes, I'm going to be a candidate for dog catcher. And so what do I want to say about myself as candidate for dog catcher? I want to say that I will spend county tax dollars wisely, that I will make sure stray animals are collected or picked up and aren't a threat to the community. And I will do that by cutting the budget and running a smart office where we streamline our services but still providing high quality. What about us on them? Say Patty is my opponent here. She's running for dog catcher. And she was caught in, she was dogfighting in her backyard. She's been charged several times, not really, but let's say she has, dogfighting in her backyard. That's obviously a weakness that we would want to highlight. This is something that would cause voters to question her ability.
However,
or her.
Can we just say that if I was having dog fights in my backyard, I was a really good dog catcher. Therefore,
you could be, but this
okay,
taking me off message here. Yeah, it's very important, and whatever the issue is, think about candidate Obama and candidate Mitt Romney, or think about the last Senate race in your state, or the last congressional race in your state. How did your candidate or the opposing candidate define you and themselves? So in the bottom left corner we have them on us. What is our opponent going to say about us? What was Barack Obama going to say about John McCain? He's old. He's out of touch. He doesn't know how many houses he has. These are all things that they used against John McCain in 2008. What did candidate Obama say about Mitt Romney? He's out of touch. He only supports the wealthy, the top 1%. So you have to be able to sit down and delineate not only what you can say about yourself, but what the other side is going to say about you as well. And then finally, in the bottom right corner, what are they going to say about themselves? What did Barack Obama say about himself in 2008 and 2012? He was a man of the people. He was going to bring transparency and accountability to the White House. He was going to reform various aspects of government. He was coming in as an answer to the ills of crony capitalism and all these different things. And find those credible contrasts. You find issues that resonate with voters. And what you'll see is if your campaign or to a larger extent, larger scale campaigns will use polling to see what issues are important to voters. You know, if you knew candidate X voted for pro-abortion legislation, would you be more or less likely to vote for them? If you knew candidate X voted to take your guns away, would you be more or less likely to vote? And then you can find out which issues are important to voters. So here's a great example of a Leesburg grid. We talked about it briefly in the previous slide, McCain and Obama. So in the top left, McCain is defining himself. He's an experienced leader. He has character. He's a maverick. He's an independent. He's beholden to no one. And he's a Reagan foot soldier. He was elected in the Reagan years to the U.S. Senate. What did McCain say about Barack Obama in the top right? He's a celebrity. He's an elitist. He's in touch with Hollywood and not Washington. He's dangerously inexperienced. He's a liberal. And yes, they even made this an issue. He could only bowl a 37. Barack Obama, terrible bowler. In the bottom left, we have what did Obama say about John McCain? He's a creature of Washington. He sold his soul to the Republican Party. He's a racist. He's cluelessly rich. He didn't know. Remember when they asked him how many homes he had? He didn't know. And he's a Bush clone. This is an extension of George W. Bush. Do you want 4 more years of what we had the last 8 years? And then finally in the bottom right, what did Obama say about himself? Hope, change. It's history making to elect this candidate. He's charitable. He's smart and worldly, and he's well educated and likable. So this is a practical example from the 2008 election. We'll go to the next slide, and this could be used in marketing as well. If you're defining Coca-Cola and Pepsi, you see Coke in the top left. Coke on themselves, they're the classic flavor. It's the taste you grew up with. It's refreshing. It's sweet but not overpowering, and it's the real thing. What does Coke say about Pepsi? It's a bad imitation. It's overpowering. It's trendy, but it's not tasty, and it's nothing but fizz. And then to the bottom left, what did Pepsi say about Coca-Cola? They're boring, stodgy. This is an old cola. It's flat. This is what your grandparents drank. It's a has-been. And then finally, what did Pepsi say about Pepsi? It's hip, it's cool, it's sweeter. It's the soda of celebrities and of the stars, and it's the new generation. So you can do this with anything, really. If you've got a ballot initiative, say you want to lower property tax rates in your county and it's gone to the ballot. You can say, you on lowering property tax rates. This will put more money in the pockets of homeowners. It will stimulate the economy. It will bring new jobs and new opportunities into the county. And you go through each of these and define your strengths and your own weaknesses and the opposing side's strengths and weaknesses, and then you can be able to prepare for the line of attacks that will undoubtedly come your way. So now we're going to talk about public relations, and there are a few types. There are 2 types. Offensive public relations, where you're defining yourself, and defensive public relations, where you're responding to your opponent's attacks. Always, always, always be on the offensive. You want to be able to frame the debate. If you're on the offensive, it allows you to frame the message and to advance whatever the issue is that you want to advance. If you're constantly defending yourself, you're not able to define your message. You're always answering questions on your opponent's terms.
Now, right now, the thing that's in the news that everyone's talking about, 2 stories really, the IRS story and the NSA story. How do you think that, I guess, both sides are presenting, who's framing the debate better, conservatives or liberals? Let's use IRS for.
I think with the IRS story, the IRS is an easy organization to hate or to dislike. Many people, on April 15th, you hate writing that check. You hate if you file quarterly or monthly. If you're a small business owner, you hate that. It hurts to write that check. And so the IRS is a convenient target, and it's an excellent target for people who believe in limited government. So the IRS is definitely, this debate is being framed largely by people who are skeptical of the size and scope of government. We're concerned. Recently, the most recent part of the IRS story is that they were buying spy equipment. Things you could hide in lunch trays and in pots and different things. Really strange stuff that they're purchasing. And it just plays into that whole, the whole idea that government is too big, it does too much, and particularly with respect to the IRS, it's too invasive. An IRS audit can cost thousands of dollars. It can tie up your life. It can put your family on hold. You have to hire attorneys and tax lawyers, and so it's a scary thing. And so I definitely think that conservatives or people who are skeptical of limited government have sort of framed that debate. You want to make your opponent respond to you, and this is back to the presentation. This is an excellent example of the IRS. For the last 2 or 3 weeks, representatives of the IRS have been up on Capitol Hill testifying or taking the fifth. But it's made them look very negative. And that's something that, because politics is about public relations, it's about what people perceive in the media, this is largely a victory for people who believe in limited government. So when handling the media, the media is not your enemy. For the most part, at the local level, if you're running a state senate campaign or if you're volunteering on a local race, the media at that level is just looking for a story. And if you present them with information in a timely manner that is newsworthy, they will cover what you're trying to get across. The press doesn't, this is to a lesser extent this. You need the press to get out your message. But increasingly, local media outlets need places for stories. They're looking for a way to make their deadline. And your job is to tell your story, to get your story out. If you're not utilizing earned media or going to the press to try to advance your philosophy, then you're really losing. This is an opportunity to get free media attention from reporters who are looking for stories to cover. So what you want to do is build relationships with those reporters. Email the local newspaper reporter, the local TV reporters, establish a working relationship with them, send them press releases on time so that they can make their deadline. And if you do that on a regular basis and create a narrative, they're going to report fairly what you've put together, and inadvertently they're going to help you advance your philosophy and your campaign. And on a campaign, only one person should talk to the media, with the exception of the candidate. You should have all the press going through one individual if you can, a press secretary, or if it's a smaller campaign, your campaign manager. So who is the press secretary? This individual is going to deliver the message, defend or define the image, and as Lynn Nofziger says, most candidates have a compulsive urge to answer questions. It was Lynn's job to keep the candidate on track, otherwise the other guy wins. So in a campaign, you've got a message. You've sat down and you said that we want to talk about jobs in the economy. We're going to talk about how we're going to create jobs in Missouri, or we're going to create jobs in Indiana. And as a candidate for U.S. Senate in one of those states, that's what you want to talk about. You don't want to get off into little rabbit holes and go on adventures, because the left wants you to get off message. They want to talk about divisive issues, particularly social issues, increasingly in the media. And as we saw in the last election cycle, the left really derailed 2 U.S. Senate campaigns by getting them off message.
What is the most frustrating thing that you see press secretaries do?
Sometimes press secretaries think that they're the candidate themselves. That's one thing. If you've got somebody who's headstrong, and there's a story from Capitol Hill from a couple years back, a press secretary for a high-ranking Republican member of Congress wanted to be the story, and it distracted from what that member was doing. And so, somebody like, I'm an activist, I like advancing my philosophy. I like whatever that story is, I like to get the story out there. But if I'm working on a campaign, the story is my candidate, and the story is what my candidate stands for. So definitely a headstrong, self-interested press secretary is pretty dangerous. So your press secretary is going to develop a reliable media list. Contacts, email addresses, phone numbers, fax numbers, Twitter handles even. I've got a Google Drive spreadsheet of every member of the press I've ever come in contact with. I've got their name, their affiliation, their email address, their phone number, their fax number, their Twitter handle, backup email addresses. So if I have to send out a press release, I can just copy and paste that into a blind courtesy copy, BCC. You always want to BCC these types of communications. But I send out that to an updated list, and then I get calls back from reporters who are looking to cover the story. But it's an up-to-date list, and you always have to make sure your list is up-to-date, because reporters, particularly Washington-centric reporters, folks who write for Politico or The Hill, the way it works is they bounce around oftentimes from outlet to outlet. So if somebody is at Politico, 18 months ago, they may be at The Hill, or they may be at the Washington Times now. Your press secretary is also going to write press releases. We'll talk about what to put into press releases in the format here in just a couple of slides. You're also going to use advisories and photo releases. If you are sending information to local newspapers, you'll want to use high-resolution color photos. You can also send black and white versions if they're relegated to further in the newspaper.
No, it used to be that we would fax press releases to places, and now they're all emailed. Do you recommend using a fax as well? Do you think hitting them multiple times with a press release will make them more likely to print it?
What you can do is, if you email them, and when I send out a press release, in the subject line, I have in all capitals, press release, : and then whatever the title of the press release is. And I BCC the list of media contacts. And then if it's a reporter I want to cover it, if I have somebody in mind, I could follow up with a phone call. Say, just want to make sure that you received my press release. A lot of these reporters have their cell phone numbers available so that they can easily get in touch with their sources. So I don't use faxes as often, and in fact, in all of my columns on that spreadsheet of media contacts, I don't have very many fax numbers. There are a few, but I rarely use a fax to send a press release. And then finally, your press secretary is also going to conduct press conferences, news conferences. We see this daily at the White House press briefing. It's probably some of the most exciting entertainment on C-SPAN these days, when Jay Carney goes out and talks about the Obama administration's agenda. This is, to a lesser extent on a smaller campaign, this is what a press secretary would be doing, answering questions and communicating the campaign message. So how do you write an effective press release? There are a number of steps and more that we'll talk about in the slide after this. You're going to use press releases as part of an overall strategy. What I like to tell people is that you're creating a narrative. The press won't cover everything that you send out, but what you want to do is create a story in their head so that when something newsworthy comes along, they're able to go back and say, oh, I remember a press release about this. Great example is in 2010, I worked on a campaign in Maryland. Our opponent supported a European-style form of taxation that doesn't exist anywhere here in the United States. And we sent out a press release. Our opponent supports a value-added tax. It's a European-style form of taxation, does not exist anywhere in the United States. This would be a tremendous burden on Maryland families. It would strangle job creation and hurt the economy. Our message, jobs in the economy. So the press went to him and asked him, do you support this form of taxation? And he said, no, there's nothing in my literature, there's nothing on my website, nothing anywhere that says I support this. Well, they had taken it off their website. So the news came back, the reporters came back to us and they said, look, he said he doesn't support it. Are you guys just trying to create a story here? And I was able to screen capture the part of his website that said he did support it, and I sent them a Google cache of that, basically an image of the older website, and he said that he supported it, erased it, and then lied about his support. So then it became a news story. It took a few days and a few press releases to get it out there, but after 3 days, it really put our opponent on the defensive. So, but you want to make sure that what you're sending out is news. You don't send out some whimsical story, or it's got to be news. These individuals are getting a lot of press releases. They're looking for what's important so that they can keep their jobs. Increasingly, reporters are being laid off and let go as newspaper companies are being centralized, and they're looking for hard news. So make sure that what you're sending them is newsworthy. Use Associated Press style. This is available online. If you're watching this webinar, you have the internet, just look up Associated Press style. We'll hit some of the highlights here, though. Opinions and things only in quotation marks. Only the facts outside of quotation marks. You tell the who, the what, the when, the where, and the why. And then you have supporting statements in quotation marks. Follow the inverted pyramid, which is the next slide. We'll talk about that. Include all your contact information at the top. I always include an email address and my cell phone number. Always end press releases with either -30 #, or the letters END, end, so that reporters know that this is the end of the press release. And then never, ever, ever, ever lie, because you're going to have to defend yourself if you lie. In the example I gave about that race in Maryland, our opponent lied about his support for this tax increase. And so once the press realized he was lying, not only did he support another form of taxation, but he was also a liar. He tried to cover it up. So here's the inverted pyramid. Most important bit of information at the top. So in the first sentence even, if I'm writing a press release from Arlington, Virginia, I put the location. Arlington, Virginia, hyphen, who, what, when, where, why. So let's say I have a mock election at George Mason University. It's my college conservatives group is holding a mock election for the gubernatorial race here in Virginia this year, Ken Cuccinelli and Terry McAuliffe. And let's just say that Ken wins with 67% of the vote. So my press release, if I was part of the college conservatives, I would say, Virginia, George Mason University campus, Ken Cuccinelli swept the George Mason University mock election today with 67% of the vote in a shutout against his opponent, Terry McAuliffe. So it gave you all the details, who, what, when, where, and then you move down into supporting statements. So the college conservatives chairman, Patty Simpson, says what a great victory this was for Ken Cuccinelli and for all of conservatives all across the Commonwealth. And then further details, 200 students voted, or however many students voted, contact information for the contact in the group, and as you see, second least important, and so on and so forth. Because when reporters are looking at your press release, they're going to scan that first line, and they're going to try, if it becomes newsworthy or if it is newsworthy, they'll incorporate it into a story, and they may use part of your press release verbatim. But if it's cut for length, they're going to cut from the bottom. So make sure that all your most important information is at the top. So behind the scenes, when you're working with the media, never let the candidate take a direct media call without first being briefed. Give that individual some background. Morton Blackwell is the president here at the Leadership Institute. He also serves as the Republican National Committeeman for the state of Virginia. In the spring, he and I went to Los Angeles for the RNC meeting, and he had a lot of media requests about what he was doing in the RNC. And what I was able to do is tell him who the reporter was, who they wrote for, what their slant was, what some of their stories were, and sort of prepped him to be able to work with that individual, work with that member of the press. And this is what you should do for your candidates. Who's that local reporter? In Frederick, Maryland, when I worked there in 2010, we had a great local reporter. My candidate had a fantastic relationship. The reporter always covered our stories fairly. Not biased toward either side. She was looking to get to the bottom of the story. And so I was comfortable with my candidate talking to her. But always make sure that your candidate or whoever's in charge of communicating that message understands the scenario, the reporter, the publication, and so on. Never let the candidate provide an interview without proper advance work. And that's just what I said. You want to make sure that your candidate understands what the issues are and what the slant of the publication or the news station is. Never lie to a reporter. You're trying to develop a positive, a good working relationship with these reporters. If you lie to them, they will stop coming to you for information, and they will stop covering your side of the story. It's very It's a very bad idea to lie to a reporter. And in fact, great example is, for those of you who remember the Anthony Weiner scandal when he was in Congress a couple of years ago, he treated the reporters as antagonists and lied to them. And so they became very unsympathetic to his cause. If he were going to save himself in 2011 when he was under fire, he wasn't going to do it by making enemies out of the reporters who were covering the story. As I said with the press releases, only spinning quotes. You put opinions in quotation marks and you have somebody say them, you attribute them to someone, and then get the reporter what they need to get their story out. There are deadlines, and reporters are sufficiently harassed by deadlines, just as we all are. We all have that project due at work. We all have soccer practice with the kids. We all have that church potluck that we have to take the tater tot dish to. It's very important that we get them the information they need in a timely manner. So when you're framing the issue or the debate, really, he who frames that issue is going to win. As Patty and I were talking about earlier, with the IRS, you have limited government advocates, conservatives, libertarians, Republicans, who have made the argument that the IRS is invasive and intrusive. And if you watch these hearings on Capitol Hill, the IRS is on the defensive, the Democrats in Congress are on the defensive. It looks very bad for folks who believe in increasing the power of the state. Word choice is very important, and Frank Luntz, you may have seen him on Fox News a couple of times. He does the focus groups. He's got a great book called Words That Work, but it's very important that you choose the right words.
It's not what you say, it's what they hear.
Yes, it's not what you say, it's what the people you're communicating your message to hear. So when I say partial birth abortion, that draws a very graphic picture of a procedure that is personally, I think that's disgusting. But dilation and extraction it's a medical term, it's not emotional, people don't really think about what that means. Things like right to work is another example. 24, 25 states now are right to work states. And that means that an employee negotiates his salary and his employment terms with the employer directly without having to pay dues to a union. And that's something where I think that the right to work crowd is actually winning the debate on because of their use of language. Individuals should have the right to negotiate their salary and their contract with their employer without having to pay dues to some organization. And you set the stage by how you frame the debate. So if you've got a positive, pro-growth, if you're conservative, a pro-limited government message, and you're out front on those issues, you're going to win the debate. And if you're passionate about those issues, if you can connect emotionally with voters and with your neighbors, you're going to win that debate. The most important thing, and we couldn't put this any larger on the PowerPoint, stay on message. It's really important. If a reporter asks you a question 30 times, the same question, and you answer the correct way 29 times, and you mess up the 30th time, what do you think they're going to report? They're going to report how you messed up. Great example, the Senate candidate in Indiana, the Republican Senate candidate in Indiana last year, was talking about jobs and the economy. And he was forced to respond to the Todd Aiken issue. And what he said was, taken in context, was a conservative line that was taken out of context and used in the media. He should have said, what I'm talking about, and we'll go into the next slide, we'll just go right into it. The moms and dads I'm talking to, the taxpayers I'm talking to in Indiana say that jobs and the economy are what's important. In 1992, Bill Clinton did this in a fantastic way when he was in New Hampshire. People tried to get him off message with previous scandals as governor, and he said, you know what you guys are talking about isn't creating jobs in New Hampshire. My message is one that's going to create jobs in New Hampshire. My message is one that's going to resonate with the American people. It's going to lower taxes. It's going to create jobs. It's going to streamline our government. And it's going to get this economy going again. Because my predecessor, or the guy who's in office now, he said he wasn't going to raise your taxes, and he is. And so this is something that's very important. And you have to have a principled candidate who will not necessarily deflect, but who will stay on message, who will talk about what's important to that campaign. So here are some phrases, some transitional phrases. The moms and dads I talk to tell me this is what's important. We're getting away from the important issue here. What's important to Virginia voters are jobs and the economy and how my plan is going to create jobs. And what you're going to see here in Virginia in this election cycle in 2013 is that the Democrats are going to try to talk about social issues with the Republican candidates. And Ken Cuccinelli has outlined an aggressive pro-growth plan that will stimulate the economy, that will create jobs in Virginia. But Democrats, and if you watch over the course of the next few months, the Democrats are going to say, but what about abortion? But what about gay marriage? But what about this and that?
So what would you say, a lot of conservative candidates would probably get a question along the lines of, why are you a participant in this war on women?
Absolutely. This is something that is going to happen. Every candidate, every Republican or every conservative candidate is now going to get this question. Do you agree with Todd Aiken? Or do you agree with whoever? Do you agree with these, and they'll call them extreme comments. And oftentimes they won't even repeat the comments. So that when you read it in the newspaper, you see it on the news, you're going to think, well, that conservative or that Republican believes some extreme things. It's very important that you're able to say, look, the issues of my campaign are this. Whatever you've, and you can hold some of these beliefs that the other side calls extreme, but it's not something that, not everybody gets the same message. Not every message or one message doesn't connect with 100% of the electorate. So you want to make sure that you're tailoring your message. You don't have to back off any of your principles, but that you're tailoring your message to the individuals who are going to vote for you. So it's very important. Some other of these transitional phrases, let's not forget the big issue here. The big issue is, how are we going to lower taxes and create jobs for families in the Commonwealth? Or the most important issue we need to talk about here is blank. These are important ways to move back on message. Let me tell you what this means to you. Excuse me. How is this relevant to New Hampshire families, to New Hampshire taxpayers? And here's some final thoughts, and we'll take a few questions. Remember the message formula. You've got to make an emotional connection. You've got to be relevant. You've got to, your message has to connect at an emotional level. It's got to connect at a personal level. And somebody has to walk away from meeting you or from reading your literature and saying, if I vote for this conservative, it's going to help me in this way. And they have to understand that, and they have to connect with that. Use the Leesburg Grid to develop your message. It's not just for politics. You can do this for if you're in marketing and you want to compare and contrast Google Music and iTunes or whatever they happen to be. What are the pros? What are the cons? And you should do this early out on your campaign. And then most importantly, we really, and in all my presentations here, either webinars or here in the Leadership Institute headquarters, I stress it's so important that you stay on message. You talk about the issues that your campaign has decided are important, that will add voters, add supporters to your campaign, not take away. And this is something that we're seeing play out right now, particularly with the war on women language that the liberals are using in the press. And so it's very important that you stay on message. So, Patty, do we have any questions or anything?
Just a couple. How tied to your campaign theme, let's say the words that you put on your signs, your yard signs, how tied does the message have to be to that? Does the message come from the three words that you might put on there? Strong, American, leadership?
Absolutely. In the Leesburg Grid that you've now completed for your candidate or your campaign, in that top left box where you're describing yourself, patriotic, someone who will cut taxes, you don't want to have too much clutter on campaign signs, and I've seen some really bad campaign signs. My formula is candidate's name, maybe just a last name even, or if they're running if they've got a catchy first name, Buck for city council or something, if their last name is long and people can't read it or spell it. And then something at the bottom, maybe, consistent conservative, principled conservative, or whatever it happens to be, whatever you've decided are the important issues in your campaign. But you don't want to cover a yard sign in a whole bunch of text, because people are driving by these, they're catching maybe one word, and then they're moving on.
Great. And finally, what are the top two mistakes that candidates make on the trail regarding not sticking to their message?
That's important. Not sticking to the message, I think, is singularly the most. And your candidate has to have a certain level of discipline, and you may want to talk about whatever these other 10, 15 issues are, and these 10 or 15 issues may resonate with 5% of the population, 10% of the population. You have to find things that resonate with more voters. The more voters you can bring in under a singular message, the better off you're going to be. So my advice to candidates and to campaign staff who are working with candidates is go over that message over and over. Understand what's important. I say concise, consistent, and coherent. It's got to make sense to voters. It's got to be the same message. You've got to come out with the same points each time. And you have to be able to do that over and over again. So it's really important to stay on message, to make sure that you understand what brings people into your tent, what brings them into your campaign, and then you hammer that message home to each of them until you've locked down their vote on Election Day.
We've got a question from Michelle. Michelle, I'm assuming that you are from Minnesota because you put DFL in your question, which is
Democrat Farm Labor.
right. But her question is, if my candidate is the incumbent and the opponent is running for the first time, how do you tie that opponent to that particular political party or whatever party that you're running against?
And what you've seen, I saw this on a very small race, a state house race in 2008 in Tennessee. It was a Democrat candidate in what was trending a Republican district, and it was Barack Obama, very unpopular in Tennessee. In 2008, he only won 4 counties, I believe. None of those counties were in this particular district. And the Republican who was challenging him, it was a Democrat incumbent, the Republican who was challenging him tied him to Barack Obama. If you vote for my opponent, he will institute the same policies that Barack Obama will institute. So what you would want to do in some cases is nationalize the race. Particularly if you're a Republican running against a Democrat in this cycle and for the foreseeable future, Barack Obama is unpopular among Republican voters, and increasingly, in the last few weeks, among swing voters. And so, if you're able to tie your opponent to that individual or to the top of the ticket, you're able to draw a stronger contrast. And that isn't we're not saying that you're running a negative campaign. You're just highlighting the places where you're different. If you look at your Leesburg grid and you're pro-life and you support the Second Amendment and you support lowering taxes on families and your opponent is pro-choice and supports taking gun rights away and supports raising taxes, it is not negative campaigning to highlight that difference. And that's one thing that I hear all the time working, lecturing with the Leadership Institute and working with grassroots activists is I really don't like that some campaigns go negative. It really, it turns me off from the political process. And there are times when they do. There are times when candidates will say negative personal things about other candidates, but simply highlighting the difference between two candidates on issues is not negative or misleading. If your candidate or if your opponent failed to pay taxes for 10 years, wouldn't you want voters to know that he was going to make, if you elect this guy, he's going to make tax policy for the voters of this district? Wouldn't you want to know if he failed to pay taxes? Things like that. It's really an issue where once you've defined your own image, and it's very important that you define yourself first, once you've defined your own image and your own candidate, you then draw contrasts against your opponent.
All right, we've got a few more questions, and the questions I have now are the last questions we'll be taking. If you have any more, you can still email them to me, but we won't be able to answer them live. And just a reminder that this has been recorded and an archived version of this webinar will be available for your viewing in the next few days. All right, here's a great question. Do you have any strategy and tactics for crisis management and examples of successful management of a crisis and a failure?
We'll go back to the Anthony Weiner story because this is one where he would still be in Congress today, I'm convinced, if he had used what I thought would have been an effective crisis management. Anthony Weiner married to a lady named Huma, who was at the time, she's pregnant. She was pregnant during the height of this. And they both probably knew she was pregnant when Weinergate, as they called it, sort of broke into the news cycle. And had he had a press conference, instead of antagonizing the reporters and lying to them, if he had held a press conference where Huma is at the podium and she's in tears and she talks about the personal misgivings of her husband and how, my husband and I are working through these delicate issues we would request that you guys give us some peace and leave us alone while we work out this very delicate personal matter. That's an emotional connection that would be hard to subvert. Instead, this is the tremendous failure. He refused to do that early on, and even lied about his involvement in the whole issue. So that's one where I think if he had taken a softer approach, and because Huma is now in his commercials for New York City mayor, she obviously wants him in politics, or she's at least going along with it. She could have gone along with it in 2011 and played the role of distressed spouse, which would have been a strong emotional connection to a lot of folks. It just depends. Whatever the scandal is, you want to get out in front of it. You want to be able to define it before your opponent defines it. Some of you may remember that former Tennessee Senator Fred Thompson, actor, ran for president in 2008. It was a very short-lived campaign. As a native Tennessean, I was a big fan of Fred Thompson during that race, and he had some surgery, or he went in for a checkup, and he had a cancerous spot removed or something. I can't remember the details, but he immediately came out with it. He said, look, I went to the doctor. They noticed some cancerous stuff. They took it out. I'm all healthy now. I'm good to go. That was an example of getting out in front of the story. What could have been a scandal, or what could have been a stumbling block in the campaign, was actually he was able to come out and say that. Another excellent example is Reagan '84. Where
were you alive?
I wasn't alive in 1984, but this is a fantastic YouTube video. The debate between Reagan and his opponent. The issue is Reagan's he's in his 80s. He's an old guy, and there were whisperings that he would take naps in the White House and that he wasn't up to the task of governing because it was too strenuous and too much work. And he said, I will not, for the purposes of this campaign, make age an issue of this campaign, and then was able to turn it back on his opponent. I will not exploit, for political purposes, my opponent's youth and inexperience. And on national television, he delivered this, and Reagan had a fantastic wit and a fantastic deadpan delivery, and the entire audience laughed, his opponent laughed, and they really took the biggest issue off the table for the Democrats in 1984. So if you're able to use humor, and especially humor, to attack a particular issue, and if you get out in front and you define it, you can really disarm your opponent.
God bless you if you're not funny. All right, one last question, and this is a really, really fantastic question. I know that at a lot of these trainings we talk about things on national level, races. And really, majority of people that take our trainings are running for local office and state office and volunteering on that. And this question is, how do you stay on message as a local or state candidate when confronted with a question concerning a heated national debate? How do you bring it back to a local level?
You just use those transitional phrases. In Washington, they're talking about the IRS, or they're talking about Benghazi, or they're talking about whatever it is. But here in Richmond, Virginia, what's important to the moms and dads that I talk to on the campaign trail are, how are we going to lower taxes? How are we going to create jobs? So you can reference those. Whatever the scandals are, whatever the issues are in Washington, or if you're running for an even smaller office, county commission, which a lot of these really local races aren't going to get very much attention at all. But just say, look, folks are going to talk about the scandals in Washington. What I want to do is talk about the issues that are important to the families I've spoken to, or I've spoken with. And particularly if you're a Democrat this cycle, you're going to want to make it as local as possible. My opponent is trying to paint me as a Barack Obama, Nancy Pelosi, Harry Reid Democrat. But if I'm being elected in rural Tennessee, I'm a farmer. I'm a member, I go to the co-op, and I know the guys down at the Presbyterian Church, and I eat at the Hardee's every Saturday morning, and I'm not what my opponent is trying to paint me to be. You know me. I'm your neighbor. So that's one thing, particularly if you're a rural Democrat in the next few cycles, you're going to run as far away from Washington as possible, and you're going to want to make the race as local as possible. On the flip side, Republicans are going to want to tie every rural Democrat to Barack Obama and Democrats in Washington, the scandals.
That's great. Well, Matt, thank you so much for joining us tonight, and thank you to everyone who tuned in at home. I hope that you found it informative. And to answer your question, if you would like the PowerPoint, just shoot me an email, live@leadershipinstitute.org, and I can get you a PDF of it. And once again, that this has been recorded, and we'll let you know as soon as it's uploaded to our website. You can watch all archived webinars of the past at www.leadershipinstitute.org/activism on demand. And you can find lots of different subjects on there: campaign, activism, fundraising, new media, you name it, we got it. We're a one-stop shop for activism and campaigns. We'll be back here in two weeks from tonight. It'll be a 3 p.m. webinar, and it'll be talking about persuasion and how to persuade people, not just in politics, but in life. And hopefully you'll find that interesting and you'll sign up. Once again, thanks again for being with us tonight. Have a great night.